Right, without further ado, we're going to kick off with our first session of this morning, and it's called Game of Thrones. So there you see Andy Duncan. We're absolutely thrilled to have Andy Duncan here this morning, and he looks remarkably comfortable in that very uncomfortable seat, doesn't he? Well, he knows a thing or two about political upheaval and threats of physical violence. He has worked at the BBC, he has worked at Channel 4, and now, of course, is CEO of Camelot. So we're really thrilled that he's going to talk to us today about marketing into the boardroom, the importance of marketing. Does it deserve a seat at the top table? How can it get one? What are the issues that marketers need to think about, and how can they get more influence in the boardroom? So, Andy, over to you. Thank you very much.
Right, good morning everyone, and great to see you all here. And there will be no sexual violence in this session, I promise that. But coming to BAFTA always reminds me of a speech I had to do here many years ago, about 10 years ago or so, for an RTS, Royal Television Society. And I had a rather serious, slightly dry speech about the future of Channel 4 and the future of public service broadcasting. And they always give out little awards at the dinners that the RTS ran. And that particular night was Michael Palin getting a Lifetime Achievement Award. And his sort of 2-minute acceptance speech turned into a sort of 25-minute brilliant speech all about how funny Monty Python was and his entire career history. And by the time it got to my bit, it all went down rather badly because it was too serious for an audience that had been very entertained. But the brief this morning was actually very clearly to look at marketing in the boardroom, marketing at CEO level. Why is it that marketing isn't kind of more represented at a senior level in business? And essentially kind of in the Game of Thrones theme, why is it that other functions, finance, perhaps technology, perhaps strategy, seem to be the kind of dominant functions in sitting around the boardroom and getting ultimately to running businesses? And what I thought I'd do is look at it through a series of questions. And I think you have to start from a really important thing, which is why is marketing not in the boardroom, is linked to how good is marketing, what is great marketing all about? And if you can understand what great marketing is all about, understand perhaps why it's not represented at more senior levels, and then think a bit about what might make the difference to get it there. So that's the kind of rough journey we'll go through, and there'll be a chance, I think, for one or two questions at the end, time allowing. So to take a step back, I guess for me personally, I spent 31 years, slightly frighteningly, in some sort of marketing or consumer-led businesses. I joined Unilever in 1984. So thinking about your 60-year point, over half, less than halfway through the TV advertising history we've now got. One of my very first brands actually was SR toothpaste. And Unilever was a kind of great pioneer, certainly in the early days of advertising, always trying to do things first. Very much a marketing-led business, actually. And also, it's great to come here this morning because Tess and I were just talking about it. About 10 years ago, when I was at Channel 4, we were one of the kind of drivers in setting up ThinkBox. And I can remember we had a couple of very big heated meetings, particularly with ITV, who were not against it in principle, but they didn't want to put any money on the table. And it took a couple of meetings to persuade them to put some money in. Tess, of course, got involved. Subsequently, Lindsay have done a fantastic job, I think, with ThinkBox over the years. ITV have probably been one of the main beneficiaries, actually. But it's been a very good example of sort of celebrating what the TV industry can do and the advertising industry can do. And, of course, I think a lot more of the sessions later in the morning will get into that kind of sense of what makes better advertising, what makes great advertising. But at its very heart, there's a kind of virtual circle that I feel my career has been involved in. Great marketing, great advertising can drive business success, unquestionably. That in turn can kind of feed and drive certainly commercially funded broadcasters, and that in turn drives great programming. You're going to hear from some of the program people later in the morning, I think. And that in turn drives public appreciation and in turn helps business go forward. So there's a kind of virtuous circle of strong advertising success, strong business success, strong media industry, and they all kind of feed each other, and the system we have in the UK is very mutually dependent. But to take a step back, and I know many of you are not from client businesses, you're from agencies or perhaps some media owners, but I think some of the points I'm going to make hopefully are relevant to all of you. One of the really interesting things is if I go back 20 years, I first became marketing director in Unilever about 20 years ago, and I sort of spent the last 20 years in my main executive jobs and in non-executive jobs sitting around board tables. The view at the time was it was only a matter of time before marketing would actually be much more represented around the board table. There was a kind of natural momentum, natural trajectory, it's bound to happen. In reality, it's probably gone slightly backwards, or certainly hasn't moved much forwards, which is quite a surprise, really. And there are some quite interesting facts out there. If you look at the US, for example, Fortune 1000 companies, a bit of research has been done recently. Of all the board directors on the top 1,000 companies in the USA, there's only 34 marketing directors on the board, and a handful of CEOs of those companies that have come up a marketing background. So that's less than 1%, which is pretty remarkable. The same stats broadly would exist if you took the FTSE 100, for example, probably slightly higher, but not that different. And there's still a remarkable number of companies that don't have marketing directors on boards, let alone marketing people as CEOs. And in many cases, the marketing director reports through to some other sort of director who sits on the board, which feels fundamentally wrong. There's another very interesting bit of research that's been done recently, which says that it basically surveyed a UK group of CEOs and asked them about their attitudes towards different functions and different directors. And very worryingly in some ways, 80% of them didn't particularly respect their marketing function or their marketing director. I'm not sure how personal it was, but certainly their marketing function. Whereas 90%, there was 90% respect and valuing of finance and of things like CIO roles. So somewhere along the way, marketing's kind of lost its way in getting that wider business credibility, although clearly everybody will understand, I guess, the more narrow contribution it makes. So if we go back to kind of first principles and what's marketing all about, I think that at its very best, and we'd all probably define it slightly differently, but at its very best, marketing should be about driving the heart of a business. It should be about actually fundamentally helping businesses to grow and move forward, because more than anything, they kind of capture the consumer view, the customer view, and bring that to life within a business. So when we think about what's great marketing, and everyone will have their different views, but for me personally, I would start with insight. I would start with actually marketing should be the champion of consumer insight, the champion of actually really bringing that outside understanding into a business in quite a profound way. I think some marketing departments, some audience insight groups, whatever you want to call them, do that really well, some do it less well. And I know on the agency side, it's a really fundamental part of the planning side in particular. Virtually all those great campaigns that we just saw glimpses of, and many of the other great TV campaigns and many other great marketing campaigns, at their very heart, they start from a piece of consumer insight. And certainly that would be my experience, that's a fundamental thing that marketing needs to prioritize and champion. The way you do it now is maybe different. The technology available, the data that's available, in some ways makes it a lot easier. But sometimes people kind of miss the wood for the trees. What you're looking for is fundamentally interesting, unique bits of insight. I don't think all marketing departments, perhaps all marketeers, have that as an absolute top priority. For me, the other kind of linked point is about creative effectiveness. I think there's a lot of emphasis put on creativity per se. Agencies like to come up with creative campaigns. It's actually quite cool to come up with something creative. Creativity for its own sake, frankly, is meaningless. The creativity has to be harnessed to an insight and to a business problem, a business need. And one of the things that I've always sort of pushed very hard in all the businesses I've been in, whether it's Unilever, whether it's BBC or Channel 4, now at Camelot, is actually making sure that the kind of quality of the brief right at the outset of any kind of work that's done is really, really excellent. Nearly always, mediocre work comes out from a mediocre brief. And very rarely does great work come out of a mediocre brief. Nearly always great work, you can trace it back to some brilliant insight, a brilliant brief. So the purpose actually of a marketing function, the purpose of, and I'm talking in its very broadest sense, has to be about harnessing great creativity, great insight, great imagination to a business problem and actually making something happen, persuading people to do something, actually informing people of something. And therefore, for me, creative effectiveness awards are always much more important than creativity awards, and the industry is full of both. The TV industry loved its awards, BAFTA loves its awards, but actually, it's about effectiveness. I would always prioritise much more than creativity. I mean, as a slight aside, I can't remember how many award ceremonies I've been to over my career, but particularly when I was at Channel 4 and BBC, you know, you're forever going to the TV awards for this, the TV awards for that, the BAFTA awards. I once had the opportunity actually to go to the Oscars. It was slightly bad timing because it was the year before we won 8 Oscars with Slumdog Millionaire. We won the Best Short Film Award, which was not quite as good. But I had an invitation from Disney to go to the Oscars, all very exciting. Picture of a scene, 5 o'clock, Sunday afternoon, LA, sunshine, and a queue of limos, roughly half a mile long, queuing up round the block to kind of drop various people off to go on the red carpet. It's about 500 yards along the red carpet. And I remember very clearly, myself and Disney and someone else from Germany, and we kind of, in our limo queue, got to the entrance, paparazzi, about 500 photographers, I would say, banks of photographers from around the world with the paparazzi. And there's a little man, and his job was to open the limo door and call out who it was. It's George Clooney, it's Meryl Streep, it's Tom Cruise. And he opened the door when we got there, looked slightly puzzled and yelled out, "It's nobody!" So I went from feeling quite proud to be at the Oscars to put back in my place, but there we are. But a lot of creative awards are kind of good, that's kind of great, but to come back to the point I was making, effectiveness is where it matters. And I remember we had a purple patch in a couple of years I was at Unilever on the foods business that I was running at the time, where we actually won 7 IPA effectiveness awards in the space of 2 or 3 years. So there was a brilliant period with PG Tips, with Oxo, with Super Noodles, with Olivio, and there was a kind of culture of brilliant creativity linked to brilliant consumer insight, linked to business effectiveness and what we were trying to do with those brands. And those principles, frankly, hold true. They held true 60 years ago, 30 years ago, 10 years ago, they hold true today. The world we're in, the technology we've got, the consumers that we're dealing with may have changed, but the principles really haven't changed. Having said that, I think 2 things have changed. I think that risk is actually something that I'm a great believer in taking risk with creative work and with marketing, and I think it's actually a limiting factor on the point about seeing influence in business. Ultimately, businesses have to take risks, and I think marketing departments need to be a driver and an enabler of intelligent risk-taking. And even in the way you go about developing creative work, you can take more or less risk. I know that the morning is all about kind of advertising and better advertising. It's not really my topic, but just for the sake of 1 minute, my philosophy has always been take a risk. There's no point in coming up with good work. Good work, in my view, is no better than mediocre work. It's sort of pretty invisible, doesn't have much of an impact. So when you're coming up with it's harder when you've only got 1 campaign in the year, but when you're running a bit of a portfolio, maybe marketing manager level, maybe marketing director level, certainly agency level, for every 10 things you're doing, be bold, take a risk, try something interesting, and actually if you can come up with 2 or 3 great campaigns, and maybe 2 or 3 that end up doing a good job for you, and then 3 that end up being absolute rubbish and in the bin, that's a far better effectiveness ratio than having 9 out of 10 that are sort of solid, and maybe occasionally getting lucky with 1 great campaign. And certainly Unilever, when I joined, was more in that camp of being very safe, global agency, club agency, all of it comfy, committee decision-making. And it took some time, and I appointed Mother to do the Super Noodles work, and BBH to do the Olivio work, which at the time was quite revolutionary in Unilever, and to go outside the club agency system, to get that sense of bravery and get that sense of risk-taking. But I think there's a greater premium now on that risk-taking than there even was then. But you've got to do it in a way that is kind of intelligent and thought through and help businesses think about that risk. And the same with program making, by the way. You're going to hear from some of the program people later. The same basic point. You want to have hit shows. You don't have mediocre shows, and you've got to be prepared to take a risk. The other thing I think that's fundamentally changed is speed of decision making. The world we're now in is moving so much faster. So I go back to Unilever days. It was quite a long process. You were developing global brands, building factories, going through complex integrated multinational research, marketers relying on research for safety and to justify stuff. And I remember being absolutely shocked by how quickly stuff moved at the BBC. In some ways, things move very slowly at the BBC, and some of the politics and bureaucracy is something to behold. But the actual speed of ability to turn around programs, today's news gets made today. Trails for tomorrow night might only be shot today. And the ability to move very quickly and trust gut feel and judgment to kind of make decisions and use research perhaps to inform and help, but primarily you've got to use your judgment and your gut. And I do think that too many marketeers and too many marketing functions are too analytical, too reliant on research, and miss the bit about using gut and using judgment. And as an individual, you've got to train and learn to use your gut and use your judgment. And sometimes you get it wrong, and you kind of learn by doing that. But I think sometimes people are afraid to do that, and particularly in a world that requires decisions quickly, and the need to be agile in the kind of modern digital internet age. I think that kind of speed thing has changed. I also think the kind of how people do stuff is very important. I've been talking quite a lot about the kind of what is great marketing, but the how people do stuff, really important. So for me, just some principles that would be top of my list. I think that context is really important. Too many people get bogged down in the detail, bogged down in the content. But for me, if you're kind of a leader and leading that sort of process, you should be setting a context, setting it really clear in terms of what's needed, and actually empowering and delegating people to kind of get on with the content, but be really clear about the context. Too many marketing leaders, I think, get into the content and into the detail rather than set that context and therefore free up their time to be connecting more widely in the business. You've got to have great people. I'm not sure how often people prioritise hiring the right people, training and developing the right people. And the kind of co-invention, the kind of, for me, creativity nearly always comes out of joint process. Nearly always teams come up with better, in my view, better ideas than individuals. Occasionally you have the genius idea, but it's true to say most great TV programs have come about through a collision of creativity, different perspectives. We've just had a big strategic process in Camelot this summer for the next 5 years. We had a record year last year, got to £7.5 billion. We're saying, okay, off the back of a record, off the back of growing really fast, how do we grow? How do we continue to do well? And actually, we've got brilliant thinking this summer, not from individuals, actually, but by getting different functions, different groups together and kind of connecting things that they wouldn't otherwise have done. And I also think connecting the kind of what you're trying to do to the purpose is really important. I think the end purpose of companies, brands, maybe a topic for another day, but I think that's become more important. I think society actually is more caring about the transparency of what companies are doing, why they're doing it. And I think if you can connect your people and your teams to the kind of end purpose more, that really helps as well. There's something about the who that matters. I'm trying to canter through a lot of territory, but for me, I'd say the who in terms of who people are being as individuals. I'm a great believer in being yourself. I'm a great believer in bringing your whole self to work, and I'm a great believer in actually allowing yourself to be the best you can be, because you're just able to kind of freely be yourself and not be worrying about behaving a certain way. So for me, if I was advising people on giving themselves the best chance of getting to the top, find a company where there's a strong values fit. Values is really important. Too many people are working in companies where they're not fully comfortable with the values, and that makes it really hard, I think. So you need to have a company where, I'm talking behavioural values, but also values consumers, values insight, values kind of external perspective, values what great marketing people can bring. So I think that's incredibly important. I think the way that marketeers behave has to be quite balanced. You've got to be able to take the rough with the smooth, deal with difficult issues. Again, I think sometimes marketing can be a bit flighty, a little bit lightweight in the way it kind of deals with issues in business, and needs to be able to have a seriousness and a gravitas and be able to kind of, when things are going great, yes, celebrate. When things are not going great, take it head on, understand why, and be more mature in the way that it deals with the kind of rough and smooth of life, I guess. And to come back perhaps much more narrowly to the issue of marketing in the boardroom, why aren't there more companies with marketing around that board table? Why aren't there more companies being led by marketing CEOs? I guess for me, we can all have our own theories, but for me, I would raise probably 4 areas that I think are causing that issue. I think marketing has an image problem. It's bizarre, isn't it? I think advertising is an image problem. I'm president of the Ad Association, which is the sort of umbrella group for media owners and agencies and clients. But it's slightly bizarre that both the advertising industry and the marketing industry more broadly has an image problem. Even down to how the word marketing is used. You know, marketing, how often do you hear the phrase, oh, I'm marketing a property, when actually what you're doing is selling a property, actually. And when I went to the BBC, marketing historically had been, they're the people that did the tea towels and the printed mugs. And maybe ran a few competitions. The reason I went there is Greg Dyke put it on a proper, for the first time ever, he put it on the board table, on the exec board. He gave it serious responsibility, so it genuinely had some power. And it was a fully paid up member of the board there. But I wouldn't have gone there otherwise, and I thought I was taking a risk in going there because I still didn't quite believe they were taking it seriously enough. But quite often marketing as a term is misunderstood. I think that's a problem. I actually think that marketing has a language problem, actually. Too many marketeers, including some of my team, talk in jargon, talk with marketing words that the rest of the business can't understand. It's a really serious problem. It gets in the way of marketing and sometimes very good ideas and very good people being taken seriously because they talk with a whole load of jargon and gobbledygook. We need to cut that out, frankly. I think there's a whole issue of marketing being seen as a cost rather than an investment. That's probably a topic in its own right, but actually how do we get marketing to be seen more as a driver and an investment, not as a cost area to be cut as soon as businesses come into difficulty. And I actually think marketing has allowed itself to be narrowed down, and actually too many marketeers, maybe it's true of some agency people, are too content to be kind of put in a box. Marketing should be a really broad strategic discipline. Too often, it's a narrow function that has a particular job to do and doesn't have the ambition or the desire or the sort of width, I guess, to kind of get involved in wider issues. So for me, that's my diagnosis of why the problem might exist. In terms of what to do about it, I would actually say there's a number of things. Great marketing at its heart is art and science. And marketing has to, as a broad function, and marketeers have to be strong on both fronts. It's no good saying, I'm a creative marketeer, but I'm not very strategic. Or I'm a strategic marketeer, I'm not very creative. If you want to be around a boardroom table, be good at both and develop on both. Now, you might have a natural leaning towards one or the other, work hard on the other. But you need to be a fully paid up member of strategic issues, commercial issues, the kind of hard stuff. But also, you should be the inspiration, the creativity, the kind of lifeblood of kind of new ideas coming into a business. And marketing, if it does both really well, will be a fantastic contributor around that board table. If it allows itself to be just pushed particularly towards the old creative, sort of slightly come up with ideas stuff, it's much less likely to have that kind of permission to operate fully around the board table. Back to when I was at the BBC, one of the very interesting things there was Greg used to run it with the exec board, but then he had a creative board with all the channel controllers, and he had a strategic board with the finance director and the strategy director and the policy director. And the way that the marketing role had been defined, it sat on both those boards, which for me was a good example of where it should sit. Too many businesses, marketing allows itself to be pushed, perhaps in some cases too analytically, or in other cases too creatively. It has to be both. It is about both. Another obvious point, if you want to be on a boardroom table as a marketeer, join a marketing or consumer-led business. It's much harder in businesses that fundamentally don't believe in consumers at their heart or aren't consumer-led. Not impossible, but just harder. I think it's also, marketeers should become the CEO's best friend. They're clearly not, based on what I said earlier, but they should. And marketing at their best, marketing directors at their best, should be a real glue around the whole organisation. They should actually be networking and connecting with other directors, bringing ideas together across the business. And if you think about particularly where businesses are now, I would really prioritise marketing being very close to technology issues and data issues. Businesses structure very differently. I'm just hiring a new chief data officer as a board level role at Camelot. We already have a digital director, still have a marketing retail director. But actually the technology data piece is an area that marketeers need to really get involved with, understand, ultimately be influencing. And for me that's really important. And marketing has to have some real responsibility. It has to have budgets, it has to have some clout. If you're going to be taken seriously and be around a boardroom table, you've got to actually control and influence the real stuff in the business. If someone offers you a marketing director job with no responsibility, I'd think quite hard about taking it personally. So that's it. And then my final kind of point I wanted to make is I see a really big opportunity for marketing perhaps to really elevate itself over the next 5-10 years in a way it has failed to do over the last 5-10 years. It's going to be helped by people, the Marketing Academy, Sherilyn Shackel's been doing great work in this area, other people are doing great work. But I think there's a gap in a lot of organisations around the responsibility agenda. What does it mean to be really responsible in a modern society? Public expectation, consumer expectation. The number one issue I'm driving at the moment for the Ad Association is the need for the ad industry to raise its game. It's no longer good enough to be legal, honest, truthful, decent. That's not good enough when stuff's going out in the name of advertising that bluntly damages advertising reputation and trust. Whether it's sector controversies like payday loans or gambling, whether it's actually to do with just misbehaviour of some people on the way they're using data in terms of data and privacy, it undermines our kind of permission and self-regulatory system. So put very simply, most companies have issues about the kind of moral compass, conscience, responsibility, what it really means to keep public trust. And if you're a marketeer or maybe an agency person who's working with marketing teams, encourage them to fill that vacuum. Encourage them to really own that responsibility agenda. All businesses have it, actually, at some level or other, whatever their purpose might be. And I think if marketing can really take that and grasp it seriously, it could really help them get a more strategic and more serious role in businesses. Anyway, I know it's a very quick canter through, a lot of stuff. I think time's running out. There might be time for 1 or 2 questions, not sure. But that was pretty much it. I hope that's been of some use to some of you, and thank you for inviting me.
Fantastic, Andy. I think we can slip in 2 questions if we are super quick. Anything, I mean, there's a whole range of fantastically, look at my list of action points from that. Has that inspired any fantastic questions? I might just kick off with one and then I'm sure somebody will be brave. So Andy's really struck by your point about short-termism. So business is moving incredibly fast, so therefore you need to react from your gut. But actually, sometimes I think almost the opposite is happening, that people are companies getting very dependent on short-term metrics because they feel as though that's the analysis that will help. How do you sort of reduce dependency on these, the seduction of short-term metrics that are endlessly available now?
I think it's much harder for stock-listed companies because you have kind of city pressure on that short-term pressure. I think a lot of it comes down to doing your homework properly. If you've got really good strategic thinking and you're really clear about the long-term direction of a business, the purpose, where you're trying to go, the strategy, and you've really done your work on that brilliantly, some of the shorter-term decision-making, particularly when it needs to be done quickly, is much easier because the framework, the context in which you're making it is already there. Where short-term decision-making is very dangerous is if you haven't got the right framework and haven't got the right alignment in a company about what you're there to do, what you're trying to do, why you're trying to do it. So I think you can't over-invest in time building a shared understanding of the strategy, the direction of travel, the culture, how you believe in doing things. I've spent 10 days this year with my senior team on how we do stuff at Camelot, not what we're trying to do, but how we do stuff. And that means when we have a crisis, an emergency, we haven't got to kind of spend a lot of time making a mistake. We jump straight into a shared understanding about how to do stuff. So I think short-term decision-making is more likely to be good if you've done the long-term thinking beforehand.
Okay. Any other final questions before we move on to the next session? You're very silent. Oh, it's one at the back there. Yeah, would you, like Zoe, springing like a gazelle up the stairs with the microphone? Thank you.
Thank you.
Would you just say who you are as well, please? Is it on?
Yeah, hi, Dino from the 7 Stars. Hi, Andy. Do you think that marketing has a problem with how long marketing directors stay around in terms of the turnaround of marketing directors? And how does that compare to other kind of board positions in terms of how long people can stay committed to a company?
Yes and no. I mean, I think it's very hard to generalise. I think if you are going to do a proper serious job at a board director level role, you need to be in it a few years. I think it's hard to make a serious impact in a broad sense over a 1 or 2 year period. And I think perhaps sometimes people are chopping and changing too quickly or not given enough of a chance. You know, as a rough rule of thumb, I mean, my view would be if you're going to make a really broad strategic contribution in a business, you need to be there at least 3 years in that role and probably up to 5. And probably for CEO level, you are thinking more 5, 10 years out. And probably it's at least 5 years plus. And I think it's a two-way street. You need the CEO and the kind of non-execs of a board to give that person a proper chance, but equally you haven't got to do everything in the first 3 months. And I think sometimes people are rushing too much to make perhaps too superficial rather than think about a proper serious strategic impact over time.
Okay, brilliant. We could go on all day, but that was absolutely fantastic. Thank you, Andy, so much. Really wonderful.